All right, first of all, thank you to Pam for the introduction, and thank you to everybody for attending this workshop today, and thank you to everybody watching online. I think it's really cool that GMA is doing this as a webinar. It's a great way to reach more people, so I'm excited to be a part of that. We're going to be talking about a topic that is growing in importance for cities these days, and that's cybersecurity and protecting your data. I was also excited to see a couple IT folks here in the crowd, so some of my own kind. It's good to see. Before I begin, let me tell you a little bit more about me. I've been doing IT for 16 years now. My specialties are network security and disaster recovery. I've been working with cities specifically for a number of years now. I have a unique perspective on the needs of a city for that reason. I have GCIC certifications, and for the IT folks out there, I have MCSE certifications, among others. And now on to the important stuff. So we live in an age of information right now where everything you do seems to be online. If you think about your daily life now, the first thing you do whenever you want to go find something about a restaurant or a store or anything like that is usually you get online and you Google it, or you search on the web, however you choose to do so. It's really changed our lives in that perspective. I mean, no one wants to pick up the phone anymore. Everybody wants to look online for information. So if you think about just 20 years ago, I mean, could you have imagined being able to do everything from online banking to looking at mugshots of your favorite celebrity online? I mean, it's really amazing when you think about it. One of the greatest challenges that's come with this information age, though, is it's given rise to a whole new category of risk that you have to manage. And these cyber risks have become such a big deal that you hear about them almost daily now. And to just give you an idea of how mainstream this has become, I actually saw on TV the other day, there's a CSI cyber show now. So I don't know if anyone saw commercials for that or has ever watched the show, but that just gives you an idea of how this is really mainstream. And it's become such a hot topic that there are actually states out there now that are passing laws that require cities to take basic steps to protect their data. Kentucky's one, for example. So you've got to imagine at some point soon in the near future that Georgia and other states are going to begin doing the same thing. So now's a great time for everybody to start learning a little bit about this and getting your head wrapped around it. So as you know, local governments are entrusted with some very sensitive information about your community. Because you collect tax information, sometimes there's social security information on file, a whole list of things that could be used to steal people's identities and things of that nature. So as city staff and elected officials, it's your responsibility to make sure that this data stays safe. And that's really the heart of what cybersecurity is to a city. Now, you've all probably heard stories in the news in the past year or so about large government entities or large companies, Sony, the IRS, the state of South Carolina are a few that come to mind, that have had some kind of cyber attack. The reality of this information age we live in, though, is that this kind of thing can happen to any size city, not just the big ones. In reality, it actually is more likely to happen to a smaller city. You just don't hear about it as much because, smaller scale. The reason that smaller cities usually end up being more at risk is because they don't take the steps needed to prepare themselves. So one of the goals of this workshop today is to give you just a basic foundation of what you need to help protect yourself. The most common misconception I think cities have, smaller ones especially, is that they're too off the radar or not big enough to have an attack happen to them. This is really far from the case. Cyber criminals, not unlike regular criminals, are opportunistic. They usually look for the easy score rather than targeting specific entities. They use sort of a shotgun spray approach and attack where they see vulnerability. So think about it this way: they probe a vast number of networks or websites, and wherever they see a hole or some kind of vulnerability, that's where they attack. It's very rarely going to be a targeted kind of thing where somebody gets angry at you and wants to just hack your system. So obviously you don't want to be part of that group that is unprotected and that they see as the weak gazelle on the Amazon. So you really owe it to your citizens and your community to protect your data. And in the past, it was easy to throw your hands up in the air and say, I don't know anything about this computer stuff. I didn't know what to do. You can't plead ignorance anymore on this kind of thing. It's too mainstream, as I said. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that you've got to spend millions of dollars on IT and be absolutely bulletproof. Again, there are some basics you can do to protect your city and your data, and hopefully you'll pick up on some of those today. Really what it boils down to is that a little education helps, and you're taking the first step by being here. So what now? How do we protect our data? A lot of people are surprised to hear this, but the biggest threat to your city is your own people. As we get into this further today, you'll start to understand a little bit about why that's the case. But again, as I stated a minute ago, cyber criminals, similar to regular criminals, are usually looking for the easy score. So whenever you aren't taking the basic steps to protect yourself, that's whenever you become the victim of a cyber attack. So again, we're going to try and fight this with a little education. And with that said, I'm going to touch on several topics today, specifically passwords, virus attacks, data backup, outdated software and security updates, physical security, and city websites. I encourage you all to jump in anytime you have questions, and I'll repeat them for everyone watching online. This works better with audience participation, so by all means. I know we've got a couple IT folks in here, and I'm sure some watching online. The scope of this workshop is not deep technical detail, so if there's anything you want to talk about in further detail after this, come grab me and I'll be happy to talk through it with you. All right, so let's dive right in and talk about passwords. So using passwords might seem like a really obvious solution to start with, but there's far more to it than just using a password. There are good passwords and bad passwords, for example. All right, has everybody here seen the movie Spaceballs? Great Mel Brooks movie from back in the 80s. It was a spoof on Star Wars. One of the best movies that came out in the 80s, really funny. One of my favorite scenes was character Dark Helmet, who was supposed to be Darth Vader, and a character named Colonel Sanders are getting the combination to the air shield of the planet Druidia. They find that the combination is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and Dark Helmet says that's the kind of combination an idiot would have on their luggage. Just then Mel Brooks walks in, and when Dark Helmet tells him we have the combination, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Mel Brooks of course says that's the same combination I have on my luggage. So Dark Helmet's right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is an example of a bad password. To give you a real life example, movies are great, but a real life example that demonstrates the risk of having a simple password like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 was something that happened back in the fall of last year that you may or may not have heard about. It was the leaking of celebrity cell phone contents on the internet. For anyone who did not hear about this, some hackers got into the Apple iCloud accounts of several celebrities, stole some very personal pictures, and posted them all over the internet. A lot of people wanted to blame Apple and the iCloud app for this happening, but in reality what it came down to was that these celebrities were using very simple passwords that were easy to crack. So how does that work exactly? The oldest trick in the cyber criminal book is called a brute force attack. And this is really simple. All it is a cyber criminal will run a little program that basically guesses passwords until it gets a hit or somebody stops it. So they'll try 1, then they'll try 2, 3, and so on until they either get a hit or, again, something stops it. So if you're just using a series of numbers like your address or your birthday or something like that for your password, it's only a matter of time before they figure it out. So I'll spare you the math on how all that works, but every additional character you add to your password, or every different kind of character like a letter or a special character, increases the complexity of your password by a number that's really impressive. So it makes it that much harder for your password to get hacked. Some stats on one of my favorite technology studies in recent memory are shown on the screen right now. This was a study done by a research company in California. Basically what they did is sent a small army of interns out to several local businesses and had them try to determine people's passwords just based on what they could find around the person's desk. Very scary stat, they were able to find 1 out of 3 people's passwords were written down somewhere on their desk, either on a sticky note stuck on their monitor, a scrap of paper underneath their keyboard, something like that. Taking it a step further, they would look around the person's desk and try to guess passwords based on what they found. So if that person had a picture of their kid with the kid's name on the picture frame, they'd try that child's name. If they had a University of Georgia mug on their desk, they would try Bulldogs, and variations of that. Taking that approach, they were able to guess up to, it was half of people's passwords. Really scary stuff. So if you think about that, these were interns doing it. And if you've got a good cyber criminal out there, or somebody who is an experienced criminal, I'll put it that way, it'd be easy for them to get into your stuff if you're using that kind of simple password. All right, so let's talk about some best practices to follow with passwords. First and foremost, I'm going to state the obvious. Use a password on everything. Any device that holds city data or accesses your city data should have a password. This means not only your computer, but also if you've got an iPad, your smartphone, anything like that should have a password. Not having a password on there is like leaving your front door unlocked. And really, there's no excuse for not using passwords these days. Next, also stating the obvious, don't write your password down and leave it around your desk. That's like locking your door but leaving the key in the hole. If you have trouble remembering passwords, this is one of the arguments I hear from people a lot is, I have so many passwords in my head, how can I remember them all? Take a look at some of the little apps you can get on your phone now. There are some that will store all of your passwords and protect it with like a fingerprint. That's about as secure as you can get. Biometrics like a fingerprint are, everybody knows that everyone's fingerprint is unique, so it's almost impossible to get through that kind of security. So again, if you have trouble remembering passwords, that's a great approach to take. Next rule to follow, avoid obvious passwords. As numerous celebrities taught us last year, if you use really simple passwords, nude pictures of you will end up on the internet, and nobody wants that. Make sure you're also using long or complex passwords. A complex password contains lowercase letters, uppercase letters, numbers, and special characters like exclamation points and things like that. And again, if you have trouble remembering that, one of the new studies that has come out recently is that really long passwords are almost as effective. So try something like a sentence. I was born in Lavonia, Georgia. That's as effective as, studies are showing that's now as effective as using a really complicated password. A lot of people hate hearing these last two rules because they're all about convenience, but don't check that box whenever you're using a program or a website that says save your password. That makes it really easy for someone just to walk up to your computer and get into whatever app or whatever website you were using. And also rotate your passwords periodically. I always hear people groan about this, God, why do I have to change my password every 90 days? But this is a really, really good practice to get into. You get into the habit of having all your passwords the same, and before you know it, if somebody knows your computer password, they also know your bank account password. So rotating passwords is important. For the IT folks out there, there are several in this list that you're probably going to get some resistance on, and you usually will have to enforce with policy. My experience has shown that if you present the data, some examples like what I've done here, to your city leadership, it's a lot easier to get them to understand why it's important to do this. And nobody wants their identity stolen, so. All right, let's move on to virus attacks. I'm going to start this one out with a case study. This is a real-world example of a small city with a population of about 6,000 people. So imagine this scenario. You're the finance officer for your city. You have access to all the city's funds and some very sensitive information. You're sitting at your desk one day, and the bank manager from the local bank calls you and says that somebody's been trying to do wire transfers of $90,000 at a time out of your account. You find that your computer is infected with a virus, and somebody's remote controlling it and doing the wire transfers. So how does this kind of thing happen? Oftentimes the virus's sole purpose is to open up remote access for somebody, usually in another country, to remote control and do whatever dirty deeds they want to do. And in this case, the finance officer's computer was not protected by antivirus, it was not updated, and somebody remote controlled it and was trying to steal money. So one of the things that's changed in the past few years as cybersecurity and cyber attacks have become more mainstream is that banks will not assume responsibility if you aren't taking basic steps to protect yourself. They'll claim negligence just as quickly as they'll help you out now. So if your computer gets hacked and someone is able to get into your bank account that way, and you don't have antivirus software, they might tell you to go take a hike. And in this scenario, this was several years ago, so the city really got lucky. The bank's fraud protection really saved them. But if you look at it, this could have been avoided. The wire transfers were caused by simple negligence, and if that computer had been properly managed, updated, and protected with antivirus software, none of this would have happened. And not to mention the time that was wasted by the city staff having to deal with this little fiasco. And you're looking, most importantly, that bottom line, real dollars could be lost. That's the most important thing in the end, right? All right, preventing virus attacks. I'm going to repeat myself here, and I'll probably do this several times, but when you consider the sensitive nature of the data that cities store, it's absolutely critical that you do the basics to protect yourself from viruses. Fortunately, this boils down to education a lot of the times, and just using taking a few simple steps. This begins very simply with having antivirus installed on all your computers. Again, in this day and age, there's no excuse for not having a computer protected with antivirus software. But I'm stating the obvious because you'd be surprised how many times I walk into cities and find that they don't have antivirus software. Or maybe they installed it several years ago and stopped paying for the subscription and it stopped updating itself. It happens more often than you might think. For the IT folks out there, this also means making sure that you've got all your servers protected. I'm often baffled by the number of places I walk into where people don't have their servers protected because the IT staff ran into a problem, antivirus was involved, and rather than figure it out, they just removed all the antivirus software. Very dangerous practice to get into. You're far better off figuring out what the problem is than taking the easy way out. And once you've got antivirus installed, it usually does a great job of protecting you, but there's you don't want to just set it and forget it. You need to check regularly to make sure it's running. Usually you'll get a little pop-up in the corner of your screen if it's not running or something like that, but take the time, just check that every now and then. If you've got IT staff, they're probably doing this for you, but if you don't, take the time and do it. And if you do the kind of subscription where you have to pay every year to make sure you're getting updates, be sure that you're doing that. New virus definitions come out frequently, every few days sometimes. Next step, one of our recurring themes from today is education. Helping your staff understand where viruses come from is a great first step to take to prevent them from happening in your environment. Two of the most common sources are email and just website browsing. Rule number one, which hopefully everybody knows, but don't ever open an email that looks suspicious. Virus makers are getting very creative these days with how they send out virus emails. They look like bank statements, e-faxes, even security settings from your IT staff. So if something comes in and looks a little bit suspicious, or you don't know who it's coming from, don't take the chance. Call whoever, pick up the phone, or send another email to whoever sent it to you and said, "Hey, is this email legit?" before you open it. It's well worth your time. In fact, I've had, I think in the past 2 weeks, I've had 2 different cities send me emails saying, "Hey, I got a virus and it was sending out emails under my name. Please don't open any emails from me for the past 2 weeks." Nobody wants that to happen to them. Right? So be careful with what you open with emails. Second common source of viruses is surfing the web. This is another one that people are very surprised to hear, but yes, you can get a virus just from surfing the web. And the way that works is, without having a website to show you, but if you ever scroll your mouse over an ad on a website, usually you'll see a little pop-up where it's got a link to something, something else. It's not the same website you're at. So the way websites sell ads is sort of similar to magazines or newspapers. Somebody will pay for a spot on the website, but whereas a newspaper or a magazine, they'll send the owner the art that they want on that page, and the magazine or newspaper will put it on there. With websites, they just send them a link. So the website then takes that link, embeds it in their page, and then it pulls up whatever is on the other side of that link. So if you think about that conceptually for a second, if you've got somebody who's less than reputable buying ad space, that link could be taking you to a virus, or that link itself could have code in it that is going to cause harm to your computer. The less reputable the website is, the higher chance you have of this being the case. Good websites will actually police this a little bit and make sure that whatever they're posting up there doesn't take you somewhere it shouldn't, but less reputable ones don't take that time. And the rules that govern the internet in some other countries aren't what they are in the United States. So if you've got somebody buying ad space overseas or in a foreign country, they might not be bound by some of the rules that companies are here, and they don't think twice. If you think about it from their perspective, it's in their best interest to get you to see as many ads as possible. So if they embed a little adware app in that ad, they're making more money. Great question. So the question was, for cities that are providing mobile devices to their staff, what do we recommend to protect that? Protect the communication and their data from those devices. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but first and foremost, you want to make sure that any communication between those mobile devices and your network is encrypted. And you also want to make sure, if possible, the device itself is encrypted. These are the kind of things that, if you have an IT provider or IT staff, that's a great conversation to have with them. But I would start it with encryption, and then some basic things, make sure it's password protected. That's an easy thing to do that'll make it a little bit harder, at least for somebody to get in. And it's a good idea to make sure that you don't have any data stored on a mobile device itself. It's a better idea if you have that device connecting back to a source somewhere and accessing data that way. And we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a few minutes. Thank you, Corey. Last note on the virus prevention on websites. If you find that your staff is spending a little bit too much time surfing the web and you worry that they might catch a virus or something by doing that, there are content filtering options out there that can block websites. So it might be something to consider. All right, let's shift gears and look at data backups. This, I think, is probably the most important thing that IT people do. It's something that gets overlooked far too often. The most common cybersecurity issue a city will face is data loss. So we're going to look at another case study to help explain the importance of data backups. This one involves a city, another small city, 4,800 in population. And this is a very typical scenario. One of the things that Sophicity does for cities is we provide network assessments. And this is basically an audit to check for all your technology risk and help you find where your weak spots are. And one of the things we check for is your backup strategy, making sure all your data is backed up. And in all the years we've been doing this, I could count on one hand how many cities have passed the backup audit on the first try. It very rarely happens. Typically, there's always, somebody's got a USB drive that they plug into their computer to back it up, or they got a USB drive connected to their server. A little bit bigger cities, you may have some kind of storage device. Maybe you're even doing backup tape rotation, that kind of thing. But what we end up finding is that people always miss the step of testing their data and making sure that it's working. So IT people aside, is there anyone in this room today who's responsible for rotating a backup drive or something like that at your city? Nobody? All right. That's good. So again, the step that often gets missed is testing your data. I could tell you stories all day long about cities I've gone into that insist that their backup strategy is sound, but no one's ever testing it. And that's exactly what happened here with in this scenario. the city staff set up a backup solution, and after they installed it, they didn't set up any kind of monitoring of it, or worse yet, they weren't testing it. So basically, they were just turning a blind eye to it. They were assuming it was working and hoping for the best. One day then in October of 2013, the city became infected with a crypto virus. If any of you are not familiar with what that is, this is a virus that started circulating almost 2 years ago that basically holds your hard drive hostage unless you pay it money. To add insult to injury, if you actually pay the ransom they're asking for, you've got a pretty good chance that they're going to steal your identity because they want your credit card information. And then to make things even worse yet, there's no fix for a crypto virus. You just have to wipe out your hard drive and start over. So if you aren't backing up your data, you're in a bad spot. And that's what happened to this city. The server holding their financial data, when it got infected, there were no backups, and they were just out of luck. When their city IT staff was questioned about it, they didn't have any answers. City involved us, and what we found was that they had gone the cheap route, basically. They went with a cheap backup solution and IT staff that wasn't qualified to support it. They were going for a cost-cutting move, and it backfired on them. The result of the situation was that they lost 13 months of financial data. To address the problem, they ended up having to hire contract labor to come in and piece together everything from paper records and re-enter into a whole new system. I think it took them 8 weeks, 2 full months to get back to a running state. So not only was this a significant unplanned expense for a small city, but it took their city staff, who could have been doing other things, 2 full months to get back to a running state. In the end, a money-saving move ended up costing them more than it would have cost them to do it right in the first place. All right, so again, data loss is the single most common cybersecurity risk that cities have. How you can address this. This is one of those things that people hate doing, but it's really worth your time to take a few minutes and think about your data. Ask yourself a few critical questions. What data is critical to the city? How will the city be affected when that data cannot be accessed for extended periods of time? And how will departments such as public safety function without access to their data? Now, be honest with yourself when you're asking these questions. One of the easy traps to fall into is you just say, we'll get by if we ever have something like this happen. If you're falling into that trap, I encourage you to talk to a city who has experienced data loss. You don't just get by. It ends up being way worse than you think it will be. So once you're armed with these questions, work with your IT staff, or if you have an IT vendor, to do the following. Back up your data on-site and off-site every day. If you can do more frequently than every day, that's a good idea. Ensure that the process is automated. This is the area where, aside from testing, that I see cities fall short the most. With the technology available to you today, your backup process should be completely automated. It should not require anybody walking around with a drive or a USB stick or doing backup tapes, anything like that. It should be 100% automated. And this means that if whoever's responsible for your backups is out sick or leaves the city, anything like that, nothing falls through the cracks. It still works. Have a plan if there's a disaster. I mean, there are obviously some things that you just don't care about if a tornado rolls through your city. But after you get through the basics of dealing with a disaster, there are going to be things like public safety systems that you want to get back online in a hurry. So it's worth your time to work with your IT staff and have a disaster plan in place. And lastly, and bolded on here, I can't stress this one enough, make sure somebody's testing your backups. Don't just take for granted that they're working. Another real quick example, we worked with a city several years ago that had a city manager who was a real bulldog. He was one of those who would argue with you to the death. And he insisted that they paid a lot of money for their backup solution and it was working like a champ. So when they finally had us come in there and take a look at it, sure enough, we found it stopped working 18 months ago, and they'd gone 18 months without a backup. So someone's got to be checking this kind of thing. For the IT people watching this and here today, a question?
I just asked the testing of data, testing of software, especially annually or regularly, is part of your financial audit. So they could get their credit rating lower, so they would not be able to be purchasing the backup.
That's great. That's a great point. The point made was that as part of the Georgia financial audit, you're supposed to be testing this kind of thing annually, or more so than that, more frequently than that. Unfortunately, that is, I don't have a data point to give you, but I would venture a guess that that's not happening as frequently as it should. So again, for the IT folks listening and here today, I've been there myself, and I know one of the things that falls through the cracks most frequently is, your backups. It gets pushed aside when you got more important things to do. That's a huge risk for you, though. Not few things get an IT guy fired faster than not having your backups right. So don't fall into that trap. I'm sorry, the question was, are there any offsite backup or backup software providers that we recommend? The really cool thing, Pam, about the technology available to you today is that data storage is cheap. You should be able to get a very cost-effective offsite solution that isn't going to break the bank for you. So again, it's one of those things that there's no excuse not to do it these days. I mean, cost has always been the argument, and it's so cheap now that there's no reason not to do it. If anybody's interested in what we recommend as a solution, come talk to me after this, and I'll be happy to share my thoughts. All right, switching gears again and talking a little bit about outdated software and security updates. This first stat up there on the screen is a very, very important one. 80% of cyber attacks can be prevented by keeping your computers up to date. So security holes are found in software all the time. That's just part of life in this information age we live in. And hackers are pretty crafty, and they're very good at finding holes and finding these holes in their software and using them to do whatever it is they do. And as you also know, software vendors will periodically release new updates for your computers or for your software. But usually in between these new versions, there are little updates, they'll call patches or service packs, something like that, that they release and you need to install to keep your computer safe. Most people think of, whenever I mention that, they think of Microsoft, and when your computer has that little pop-up that says you need to install updates, or iTunes does it a lot, Adobe Reader, Java, or some other ones that do it a lot. But this also applies to your accounting system, your utility billing system, any system that you run that is doing, helping you manage your city. And again, I'm going to point to that stat at the very top again. I mean, 80% of cyber attacks can be prevented by keeping your stuff up to date. So don't ignore those, warnings whenever you need to install updates, or if you're getting emails saying that your accounting system has an update to apply. Take those seriously. Rules to follow along these lines, like I just said, make sure you're take those updates seriously. You let them run if they're automatic. If they're not automatic, you get an email from your utility management system saying you need to install this, do it. This applies to your servers as well. Another little thing that cities often let fall through the cracks is making sure your servers are constantly updated. If you have IT staff, they're probably doing this for you, but if you don't have IT staff, somebody needs to be paying attention to this. And if whoever provides your accounting system and your utility management system, any system like that, has the ability to send you email updates whenever there's a new version coming out or whatever, it's a good idea to make somebody get those. We all get enough spam as it is, but this is one that's important, I think. Lastly, pay attention to whenever your apps are declared end of life. So end of life means that whoever wrote the software is no longer providing any kind of support or updates for them. The best example that I think most people will recognize is Microsoft and their Windows XP. Microsoft stopped officially supporting that in April of 2014. So that means a full 12 months now, they haven't been providing any kind of update for it. So any hole that a hacker's found since then isn't getting patched. So it's a huge risk for you if you're still running Windows XP. And I would ask who in this room still is doing it, but every time I do that, I see people hang their heads in shame, so I won't ask anymore. But understand that's a huge vulnerability you've got. So a great way to address outdated software is check with your software vendor and see if they have a cloud version of your, whatever application it is you're running. The beautiful thing about cloud apps is that if your software vendor is, managing that for you and providing you with, that application, they're keeping it up to date regularly and saving you from having to do it. So everything stays up to date, hopefully, and you don't have to do a thing. So again, IT people who are watching this online and are here today, this is another thing that I see cities let fall through the cracks a lot. And again, I've been there myself. It's easy to just forget about doing updates on your servers or that kind of thing, but it's one of those things that you can't put off for too long. And as far as applications that your city's running, hold your software vendors accountable. If they're telling you that their current software won't run on the latest server version or something like that, that's unacceptable these days. So put pressure on them, and usually you'll find that they'll work with you to make sure you can run it on whatever you want. And that's just a lazy excuse that software vendors will give you a lot, is, oh, it doesn't run on that platform, you need to pay for an upgrade, that kind of thing. Moving on to physical security. This is one of the most overlooked areas of cybersecurity. We get so wrapped up in worrying about the dangers of the internet and all that. Don't forget about the old-fashioned way of stealing stuff. The external hard drives, USB sticks, even backup tapes if you're still using them, are easy targets for somebody who's got bad intentions. I could tell you stories all day long about organizations, businesses, cities that had disgruntled employees who would take a USB stick, put it in a computer, and copy over whatever kind of data they wanted and do who knows what with it. A great little story actually that helps demonstrate this. I visited a city not in Georgia, in another state last fall, where I was doing one of the network assessments that I mentioned earlier. So I contacted the person I was meeting as I was heading up there, and they said they were running about 30 minutes late. So they instructed me to go ahead and get started whenever I arrived. So they told me exactly where their server was at when I walked into City Hall. They said, it's in the office to the right, the person will be in there, go for it. So I walk in, City Hall, I go to this person's office, I sit down at the desk, I find the server is unlocked, completely open, and I sat there for 30 minutes with complete and total access to their entire system. And I'm a pretty shady looking guy, and nobody said a thing to me. So there's that kind of trust is great, but it's a huge risk for you from a cybersecurity standpoint. The equipment like servers and anything like that, it needs to be locked both on your screen and in a locked room if possible. So on that note, some rules to follow. Real simple one, lock computers whenever you're away. And even if you're getting up for a cup of coffee or run to the restroom, lock your screen. If you don't know how to do this, come grab me after this workshop and I'll show you how to do it real quick. It's a very simple step you can take, and it'll keep anybody from jumping on your computer and doing something they shouldn't. And again, ensure that your servers and network equipment are locked up. If they have to be in somebody's office instead of like a server closet, make sure that person's office stays locked when there's no one in there. It's too much of a risk to leave that equipment unattended. If you've got any kind of USB drives that you're using for whatever purpose, make sure that they're staying locked up whenever you're not at your desk. Don't just leave them sitting out. Again, those are a real easy target for somebody to swipe. Use encryption if possible. One of the really neat things if your city's made the jump to Windows 8 is that Windows 8 will let you encrypt your hard drive. So that's fantastic if you use laptops or something like that, or some of the mobile devices out there. If you've got encryption on your hard drive, that means if someone were ever to steal it, the data would be useless to them. So that's a great idea to consider. And finally, make sure you're following the password rules we talked about earlier. Specifically, don't leave your password unattended and sitting around your desk. That's a big no-no. All right, last topic, city websites. So we're going to look at another case study to help demonstrate this one. So before we do, let me Again, think about your daily life. I mean, what is the first thing you do when you want to know something about a restaurant or a store? Usually you go online and look for it. So cities are no different. I mean, if somebody's looking to move to town and they're thinking, okay, I've got small kids, I want to see if they have a park, or, I want to see what kind of businesses are in this city. They're probably going to look at your website. People don't pick up the phone and call as much as they used to. So with that in mind, it's important that you've got your website secured. If you're doing some kind of online bill pay or online ticket pay for your city, that's introducing a connection to your accounting system maybe, and another risk that you've got to manage. In the case of this specific city, this is another small city of 2,600 people, and this city actually was approaching everything, thought they were approaching everything right. They were real big on using their website to communicate with their citizens. They were using online bill pay. Somebody was updating with all the news going on around their city, and they were really into using technology. In August of 2013, though, however, citizens visiting their website found a page full of nothing but ads. And if you recall what we talked about a few minutes ago, the danger of having, of what ads can do to your computer. And you can only imagine the kind of ads that these people were seeing. I mean, I'm going to leave it to your imagination, but it wasn't pretty. This all happened because the city's website had been hacked. And worse yet, through the website and the online bill pay feature, the hacker was able to infiltrate their utility billing system. So if you remember, one of the things I said in the beginning is that one of the most common misconceptions cities have is that they're too off the radar or too small to ever suffer this kind of attack. Well, any city USA here is a great example of when that's not the case. And what the city had done, despite the fact that they were really into technology and taking that initiative, they had made some mistakes with cutting costs in areas they shouldn't have and left themselves vulnerable. One of the most common things we see cities do with their website is they'll have the cheapest person who will do the website. And it's understandable if you don't have a technical person involved with the process to tell you, I see people laughing at me already. If you're not familiar with the process, what's important to ask, it's very easy to just do that. Go, okay, the cheapest route is the best way to go. But usually, this is one of those areas where you get what you pay for. These bargain vendors they'll use tricks like hosting websites in unsecure places, sometimes even in other countries, in order to save cost. And, or worse yet, some will even run them into their basement or something like that. So the result ends up being a website that's not properly managed or secured. So in this case, again, through the online bill pay on the city's website, this hacker was able to get into their utility billing system. And the really scary part about it is, because this website was so poorly managed, they have no idea what information was taken. The IT guy, who was just a guy in town who was doing their website, he just pretty much shrugged and said, "I have no idea." Not to mention the embarrassment to the city's image. There were citizens calling the mayor, calling the council, calling City Hall, all complaining about what's going on with the website. So remember, this city was really pushing people, hey, use our website, use our website. To make matters worse, the local guy in town who was doing the website wasn't doing any kind of backups on it or anything like that. So after they had invested, I think they spent $10,000 on this website. They ended up having to pay another company to develop a whole new website because it wasn't backed up or anything. So again, we're talking about unplanned expense and damage to the city's image. So I mean, just think about, as I started this, if somebody's looking to move to your town and they're visiting your website, and they want to see, what businesses are there, is there a park for my kids? So imagine what they're going to think if they get on there and see ads for a dating website and cheap Viagra. I mean, it's just going to be ugly. So how can you protect your website? This is another one that you can just take a few simple steps and really reduce your risk of, any kind of cyber attack. First and foremost, make sure your website is hosted by a reputable provider. This means that it should be hosted in the United States, and it shouldn't be in somebody's basement. It needs to be in a secure facility somewhere. If you're using something like GoDaddy to host your website, that's great. That's that's a good approach to take. Very important to know where it's hosted. Again, make sure it's on U.S. soil. Have the website's host audit the website for security risk by a third party once a year or so. If you're using somebody like GoDaddy, they automatically do this. It's part of their standard thing. But if it's a local company in your town, make sure they're doing that. It's having a third party do this keeps them honest. It's easy to try and audit yourself, but it's easy also when you do that to overlook things. And follow the password rules that we noted earlier. Make sure you're rotating passwords to manage your website if you're managing it yourself. And this is especially important if you have turnover on your city staff. All right, so have I scared everybody here enough to where you're going to go live off the grid? So the question was, should you be getting some kind of certificate or something from whoever's handling your online bill pay or that kind of thing? Yes, that's a great question to ask. Make sure they're PCI compliant. You don't have to go as far as making them, give you a novel to prove that they're safe. But yeah, ask the basic questions. How do you guys secure your website? When was the last time you had it audited? Are you PCI compliant? Things like that. That's a great step to take. So again, now that I've sufficiently scared everybody, I'm going to give you a few closing thoughts as I wrap this up. Again, as daunting as I may have made this sound, securing your city today, it's really not as bad as it may seem. Again, a lot of this boils down into a little education, helping people understand the risk and how to manage them. So the few closing thoughts. Most important thing I hope you guys take away from this today is that cybersecurity issues can affect any size city. Again, it's not just the big ones. Just the big ones get more publicity about it when it happens to them. Every case study we've looked at today has been a small city. I think the biggest one we looked at was 6,500 people. So it happens to cities of all sizes. Not taking a proactive approach to cybersecurity will end up costing you more in the end. Spending money on IT is a tough pill to swallow. Everybody knows that. But you leave your city at risk by not being prepared. Again, this doesn't mean you've got to go out and break the bank. There are a lot of very cost-effective solutions you can do for everything from backups to your website to everything else we've talked about today. You owe it to yourself and your city to make sure you're doing the basics to protect yourself. As much as the technical stuff might make you want to fall asleep, ask questions and be informed. This goes back to the whole education thing. If you've got IT staff or an IT vendor, ask them questions like, hey, when was the last time you tested our backups? Have you updated have our servers run their security updates recently? Just little things like that. It's kind of like, think about taking your car to a mechanic. If you don't know what to ask, if you just ask some basic questions, you can save yourself from getting ripped off. It's not a stretch to say this is similar. And yeah, don't just assume that your IT people are doing the right thing. IT people get overwhelmed. It's easy to do. And asking them questions will help keep them honest. And lastly, if you don't know where to begin with any of this, or you got questions, your head is spinning, GMA's got solutions that can help with it. So any questions? The question was, is Windows Defender or I think Microsoft Security Essentials is another one. Are those sufficient to protect your computer? Pam and I, we talked about this in another one of these that we did. There was a recent study about 6 months ago that showed Microsoft Security Essentials was the single worst antivirus solution out there. So it's free, but you get what you pay for sometimes. So having Windows Defender and the Microsoft Security Essentials available to you for free is better than nothing, I guess, but I wouldn't call it a good solution. Yeah, that's a fascinating stat. So for everybody online, the stat he just gave was that Georgia is #2 in the nation for identity theft. That's I never would have thought that. So above California and above New York. So just goes to show how important it is to take basic steps to protect yourself. Yeah. So the question was sending secure emails. So Sending emails is unless you're using some kind of secure encryption program to send emails. Emails are not encrypted when you send them out. So usually your communication with your email server, if you use Outlook or just your phone or something like that, that part's secure. But once the email gets out to the internet, it's not encrypted or anything. So what this means is be careful what you're sending. If you ever hear people say, don't email passwords around, this is why. Because once it gets out on the internet, it's easy for somebody to look at that email and see your password. Don't ever email somebody your credit card number or your bank account number or something like that. Everyone hates talking on the phone these days, I know, but pick up the phone and call and give them your credit card number or whatever over the phone. If you're fortunate enough to have some kind of encryption program for your email, that's a reasonable approach and that makes it a little bit safer, but you don't see that very often. So, great question. You know, it depends what you do every day. If the nature of your job is sending bank information back and forth all day long, yes, use an email encryption program. But if it's not something you do commonly, it's probably more trouble than it's worth for you. The question was, is typical antivirus software enough for client PCs, or do we recommend something more? That's a great question. There are really two components to antivirus software. There's prevention and there's removal. So if you actually, for our clients, we actually pair two together. We do a solution that is great at prevention and we do one that's great at removal. That's not a bad idea. Just the one thing you want to be careful of is having two that are doing protection at the same time, because then they can conflict. Any other questions? Very good point. So the point made was that you should segment off your wireless network so that your city staff uses one versus if you have public access, they should have another one, and making sure you're using passwords on your wireless. That's a great point, because one of my favorite little tricks to do whenever I'm visiting small cities is I'll pull into a parking lot somewhere and see whose wireless I can get on without a password. And you'd be surprised how many city wireless networks I can get onto without any interruption. A good example I'll give you, this is a city not in Georgia, but in another state I visited last fall as well. Similar scenario to what I was explaining earlier. I was early and I was waiting on my contact to get there. So I sat in my car with my laptop, was able to connect to their wireless network because there was no password on it, and just to give them an example of where their holes were, I was able to remote into their server that had no password on it and remote into their firewall just because I was able to get into their wireless network from the parking lot. So yeah, great point. It's a good idea to make sure that if you have a public wireless network, make sure it's isolated from the one your city staff uses, and make sure you've got a password on it. Even if it's a guest network, you still need to have a password on every wireless. Other questions, comments?
What antivirus software do you recommend?
I got this question at another one of these workshops. And I can't honestly remember, that same study that said that the Microsoft Security Essentials was the worst, I can't remember what the best rated one was. However, a good way to look is antivirus can be cloud-based now. So that's always a good idea, is take a look at some of the cloud-based options out there. Anything you can cloud really is a good idea. So that keeps your subscription up to date, keeps you with the most current technology, and avoid the free ones. That's a general rule, is you get what you pay for in IT. So the Microsoft Security Essentials, some of the other freebies out there, avoid those. Very good point made. So the point was that while we hear about large cities getting hacked, the fact of the matter is, if you don't protect yourself, it's going to happen eventually. It's just a matter of time. And I'll add to that a little bit. This scares a lot of people, but the fact of the matter is, if somebody really wants to hack you, it's only a matter of time. So the good thing is that you rarely see targeted attacks. Like I said, is most people are opportunistic. I mean, they're looking for the easy score. So the key, as a gentleman noted, is that make it as hard as possible for people to get your information. Make sure you're using encryption where possible, you're using passwords where possible. as much resistance as you can add to the equation makes it more likely that the cyber criminal will just move on. So, very good point. Thank you. Yeah, good question, Pam. This is another one that's come up a couple times when we've done these workshops. And that's how many cities actually have security policies in place. So what we find usually is that the larger ones do, but when I say larger ones, I mean like the Atlantas and the Augustas. I mean, you get below population of 30,000, you don't see a lot of cities have a security policy in place. But it's a good idea to do it. I mean, hopefully I've put enough information in front of you today that everybody understands that no city is too small to get attacked. So a basic security policy, providing some of the education that we've talked about today is a great approach to help protect yourself. Anybody else? All right, well, my contact information is on the screen. If anybody has questions about anything I've talked about, or you think of something later on, by all means, please reach out to me. I'm always happy to help. And thank you all again for being here today, and thank you for everybody who participated online. I always enjoy getting out to these things and having the opportunity to talk shop. Thank you.